immigration as a subject and with target figures, that this is being debated and produced in the Labour's manifesto, for example, is complete nonsense. This is globalist policy which is being enacted in UK without any debate in Westminster and any debate within the Labour Party itself. This is the betrayal of the nation, and we have to get this information across to the people who think the way to deal with globalist agenda is violence on the streets. It's education we need. And on the subject of education, I want to take people back to, I think it's 2016, where an author called Christopher Story was being interviewed. Let's have a listen.
A major part of this strategy since 1961 has consisted of building slowly and installing a very dictatorial regional world government over all of Europe on top of the existing socialist bureaucracies that are in the governments of each of these countries, over all of Europe, and now sadly also Britain, in the form of the European Union. And this constitutes an accomplishment of Leninist strategy as predicted by Golitsyn. And of course, while the KGB had infiltrated all the European governments and the British government, as they had infiltrated the American CIA and other parts of the United States government, in addition to that, the current treaty arrangements between the European Union based in Brussels and the new Russia mean that there's even further, tighter Soviet and KGB control over the foreign policy of this new globalist regional government that controls Russia, that controls Europe, and controls Britain.
I don't disagree with any of that.
So Christopher Story, we'll hear more from Christopher Story in just a few seconds, but of course he is agreeing with that it's the globalist agenda that is driving politics in the world. So let's hear what Christopher Story had to say in response to the opening gambit by the interviewer.
That's what it is.
Yes.
Now, let me describe the European Union, what it really is. It is a political collective. So all these British politicians who constantly talk about the need to be in the center of Europe and the need to influence, for Britain's great experience to be used for the benefit of the Europeans so that they, so that we can influence what they do, are completely wasting their breath. They are insulting our intelligence. This is a political collective. In a political collective, decisions are taken collectively.
Right.
No individual nation can take any decisions. Now,
So it destroys the sovereignty completely of all the individual nations.
We have no sovereignty.
Right.
We have no interests, and we have politicians in Westminster who talk about British interests. We have delegated and collectivized those interests. Now, there are a few residual peculiar exceptions. For example, there's a thing called the Common Foreign and Security Policy, which is part of the collectivization process. Well, Britain flouted that policy by joining the United States in respect of this Iraqi operation.
Right.
But we shouldn't have done that. The Europeans didn't know what to do and threw up their hands in horror.
Yes.
But this will probably be the last chance we'll have if we don't get out of it.
So a pretty direct warning as to what we're dealing with. We're dealing with collective politics, which is beyond national governments. He was focusing on the European Union, but of course the European Union itself is controlled by those globalist powers above it. One more part of this clip, and then I'm going to take you into detail of why we should pay attention to what Christopher Story was warning about.
This business of controlling all the political parties and allowing them to adopt different names, this was a conscious policy which was laid down by Gorbachev and Yeltsin at the 28th Party Congress in July 1990. Both Gorbachev and Yeltsin made speeches in which they said to the comrades, now is the time to follow whatever path you feel would be most appropriate. In a nutshell, that's what they said. We have the two quotes in my book, the European Union Collective. So that's what I call democratism, which is the creation and maintenance of the illusion of democracy. Now that pattern is being implemented in the European Union. because by various means, almost all the participants, even at national level, in the political process, are selected for the job, or are, appointed, or are chosen. Now, it's quite difficult to explain this, but in Britain there's an extremely lethal piece of legislation which requires all political parties to register at a central registration point, and it basically dictates what the political parties can and cannot do. But in the European at the European level, no political party can participate in the European Parliament if it's not 100% signed up to the idea of the European project.
And submission to the authority of
Absolutely.
This regional world government based in Brussels, which is now imposing dictatorial controls on a daily basis down to the most minute level of business and human activity on all residents of Europe and increasingly in Britain. And if you read the Financial Times newspaper, you see examples daily and in the Wall Street Journal of how the European Union is trying to tell people and businesses in the United States what they will do.
That's quite true. When Gorbachev visited London briefly for a day on the 23rd of March 2000, and during that visit he made a statement which I repeated at every opportunity. He acknowledged and stated that the European Union is the new European Soviet.
The European Soviet, which of course Keir Starmer wants us to be buried into deeper than we are at the moment. UK column warning about Brexit without the exit, and that's the key situation. Now, for the astute members of our audience that have said yes, but it's not the Russians driving it, absolutely correct. And of course, Christopher Story went on later after that period to talk about the higher powers. But let's focus on the warnings he gave us as to what was going to be done for society. And I'm going to bring on screen, this is the title of his book, The European Union Collective, Enemy of its Member States. And early in the book, shown on the right of the screen, is a table which I'm going to take you into now, because this revealed by a then KGB defector talked about a plan to destroy UK and Western societies. It started out with demoralization. Religion was going to be weakened and made into a spiritual desert, emptiness and ignorance. Education was going to be zero historical knowledge and complete ignorance. Media, political correctness, groupthink, Luciferian fog, culture, addictive fads, salacious and empty culture, mumbo-jumbo, ape speech. All of these things, in my opinion, have come to pass, and this is why we should pay attention to the detailed warning in this book. Law and order to be made legislated, imposed, inconsistent, with an unwarranted bias in favour of the offender, victimization of the victim, absolutely correct, and we've given that a big green tick. Social relations to be reduced to rights, not obligations, to erode individual responsibility, that has happened. Security, the police and the military to be weakened to a point where that we are effectively defenseless, and we cannot act unless we're in cooperation with other powers. Internal politics to be made aggressive, poisonous party antagonisms, a sense of drift, a failure to get to grips with issues, constant lying and equivocation, careerism and egoism. That is all correct. Foreign relations, entanglement in an ever-expanding net of multilateral treaties. All of this has been done to the UK, and it's reduced us to the state that we see ourselves in. But it goes on. Family and society, fostering of breakdown, destroying marriage, health, the use of junk food, state-provided conditional health care. And the key one here, race, the mixing of races, the elevation of racism to Hitlerian level, the promotion of diversity, degradation of breeding, genetics versus the environment debate. What was all that designed to achieve? Hatred and divisions and evil compromises, and that has now exploded onto the streets. Population to be alienated from the countryside, to be urbanized, to be forced onto drugs, and to be made vulnerable to mass epidemics. That's a very interesting one. Labour problems in the labour force, trade unions versus society, quote here, public sector chaos, unquote. So all of these absolutely achieved, and following demoralisation, the warning was that we were to be destabilised. I'm going to treat these as a block, and here it says reaction to all of these breakdown policies, mobocracy, breakdown of law and order, rioting, street deaths, and that's exactly what we've experienced. And what was the ultimate goal? Well, the ultimate goal was described as normalization, but the average person can consider this as the implementation of a new form of communism. And that is a very accurate summary of what's actually happening in this country, and we've now been reduced through all of those individual attacks to where we are now, which is breakdown in the country and violence on the streets. So for people out there that still don't understand what they're up against, the idea is that you need to learn what you're up against, because it feeds off violence, and the more violence there is in this country, the tighter the lockdown of that communist control. And don't be fooled by the fact that Keir Starmer's in his suit and tie, because as Eric Pickles said, former communities minister for the Tories, Eric Pickles said, "I look like an unlikely revolutionary, but the revolution starts here." And I'm going to suggest to our audience that please join us for UK Extra today, because we're going to discuss in a lot more detail this vicious attack by the international political elite on the UK and other nation states. Well, serious news today, but if you like what the UK column is doing, then please join us. Please become a paid subscriber, because that small donation a month helps us do what we do, and we want to expand. Please share the information, and of course we are here on these platforms, with the exception of Facebook, which is still effectively banning us for reasons best known to themselves. Anybody can purchase from the UK column shop. So if you feel that you'd like to help us, you can make a purchase with one of the items, and that will be very, very well received by the UK column team.